They say the best decisions are the ones that terrify you just a little. Signing that lease for the studio wasn't terrifying. It was thrilling. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was choosing. I stood in the middle of that rundown garage with its warped cement floor and water-stained walls, breathing in possibility. The air smelled like sawdust and old insulation, but to me, it was clean. Unclaimed. Mine. 6 months. That's what I got for scraping together every dollar from tutoring and the bookstore. I emptied a shoebox I'd kept hidden under my bed, where spare change and birthday checks had slowly gathered over the years. I had enough for a deposit, enough for first and last month's rent, and just barely enough for paint and brushes. I told myself it was time. I was 33 years old. I didn't need to ask permission anymore. Still, the lease required a co-signer, and my credit score hadn't exactly recovered from the student loan fiasco in my 20s. I asked my father. It wasn't the first time I'd needed something from him, and I braced myself the way I always did, with a careful tone, a softened voice, the kind that said, "I respect your opinion, but please don't ruin this for me." He didn't say yes at first. He said things like, "So you're gonna waste more money on painting?" And, "What happens when this little art thing dries up in 3 months?" But when I showed him the paperwork, the deposit receipt, and the projected earnings from a class I planned to teach, he signed, only after saying, "We'll keep this in both our names, just in case you flake out." I nodded. I smiled, because sometimes you do that when it's your only option. I told myself it was a formality, just a few extra lines on a page. That's all. Looking back now, I realize what I was really signing was a contract of quiet surrender. The first week in the space was a blur of motion. I moved in a folding table, some hand-me-down chairs from my aunt's attic, and all the supplies I had stored in my tiny apartment closet. I painted the back wall a deep green-blue, the color of late evening skies. On the side wall, I wrote in white block letters, "Built with bare hands, not borrowed names." It was corny, but it was true. Mail started coming in, most of it addressed to Paiche Onyemechi. My father's name, not mine. I brushed it off. I told myself, it's just a mix-up in the leasing office. He's the co-signer, that's all. But I started scanning everything that came in. I backed up every receipt. I logged every transaction, not because I didn't trust my dad, but because somewhere, deep in the back of my mind, I'd already begun preparing for war. "Is this your HD TV moment?" my brother asked when he visited the studio. He was holding his phone like he couldn't wait to post some ironic comment. I gave him a polite smile. "Not exactly. This is more like survival, on my terms." My mother brought over sandwiches one afternoon. She looked around the studio, nodded once, and said, "Just don't overdo it. Keep it manageable. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I knew what she meant. She was trying to be supportive, in her way, but her version of support always came with a warning label. "Don't dream too loud." Then came the dinner invitation. "We're all getting together," she said over the phone. "Your father wants to toast your new venture. You should come." I hesitated. I wanted to believe her. Maybe they were proud. Maybe things had shifted. I showed up with a bottle of wine and a simple salad, hoping that being useful might keep the conversation light. The table was already set when I arrived, the good plates. Candles. Even my father had on a clean button-down, which was rare unless someone died or got married. I smiled politely and took my seat, placing the wine on the counter. My mother leaned over and whispered, "You look tired, honey. Working too hard?" I nodded, brushing it off. Better than not working hard enough. She gave me that smile she always used when she didn't know what else to say. As soon as we started eating, the tone shifted. My dad raised his glass. "To Beverly, our in-house artist/entrepreneur." There were chuckles around the table. My brother added, "Let's hope she doesn't bankrupt us with her studio hobby." My uncle leaned in. "Heard you've got a waiting list already, or was that just a rumor your dad's been spreading?" I didn't respond. I smiled. Small. Measured. The kind of smile that doesn't touch your eyes. "Honestly," my dad continued, None of this would have been possible without some good old-fashioned business sense. Vision's great, but execution, that takes guts, and that's what I brought in. I sat there, silent, my hands folded around my fork, the metal pressing into my palm. I didn't explode. I didn't argue. Because when people start joking too much about ownership, it's not really a joke. It's a warning. Later that night, I went back to the studio. I unlocked the door with steady hands, even though my mind was spiraling. I pulled out the lease and read every word. Again. And that's when I saw it. A single sentence buried in legal jargon, tucked between standard clauses. In the event of operational incapacity or financial default, decision rights revert to the primary cosigner. It didn't say shared ownership. It said control. I sat down on the concrete floor, the document in my lap, and whispered to myself, they didn't co-sign to support me. They co-signed to secure a stake. Everything was still, quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it exposes. This wasn't a lease. It was leverage. The call came just as I was rinsing out paintbrushes in the tiny utility sink I'd installed myself. My phone buzzed on the window ledge, and I didn't even check the screen before answering. It was always either a bill reminder or my mother. "Beverly," she said, sweet and even, "we're having dinner Sunday, just family. Your father thought it might be nice to celebrate your new space together." I paused. The silence between us lingered long enough to crack through whatever she thought this was, but I forced a small, "Sure," into the line before she could fill the gap with guilt. She added, "Bring that cake you used to make, the one with the almond glaze." That request landed heavier than it should have. It was as if she was saying, "We're proud, but only if you still know how to serve." I stood there a moment after the call ended, staring down at the dried paint circling the sink. Despite the gnawing discomfort I couldn't name, I baked the cake Saturday night. Almond extract, lemon zest, powdered sugar, it came out golden and familiar. I even tied a bow on the box like I used to in college potlucks. On Sunday, I chose a simple navy dress and flats, neutral, non-threatening. I brushed my hair the way she liked it, the way that said, "You still fit." Somewhere deep in me, hope stirred. Maybe this was their way of saying we were wrong. As I pulled up to the house, something felt off. It wasn't the porch light or the trimmed hedges, it was the number of cars in the driveway. I stepped inside, greeted not just by my parents, but by uncles, cousins, and even two family friends I hadn't seen since I was 19. "Surprise," someone said, but no one clapped. The table was set like it was Thanksgiving. Candles, folded napkins, someone had printed menus. I placed the cake on the counter and turned to my mom. "This isn't just a dinner," I said, my voice calm, not accusatory. She gave a brittle smile. "Your father's excited. He's proud of you." That should have felt good, but all it did was echo too loud in my chest. Dinner started with small talk, lukewarm pasta, and jokes that felt more like performance. I pushed salad around my plate while my father cleared his throat and stood. "I just want to take a moment," he began, lifting his glass, "to acknowledge this next chapter in our family's legacy. Family, not my journey, not my work." He gestured toward me. "Beverly's studio, well, it's more than just paints and brushes. It's a project we've poured ourselves into. I've had ideas about that building for years, but she's bringing them to life." Laughter circled the table. Someone muttered, "You always had a good eye for spaces, Paiche." I opened my mouth, but before I could say a word, my brother clapped his hands together. "Time for a little surprise," he said, pulling out a small remote. The lights dimmed slightly as a screen lowered from the ceiling. Yes, they'd installed a projector screen. A slideshow began, photos of the garage from various angles, half-finished walls, me painting, except in every single image, my father was center frame. Me, off to the side, sometimes blurred. The music playing was an old Motown track he loved. My stomach twisted. "Don't worry," my dad said, chuckling. "We'll get better shots once it's officially open. This was just a preview for the folks at home." Home. Then I saw it. At the far end of the dining room, perched on a shelf above the fireplace, a webcam, small but blinking red. I leaned toward my mother, whispering, "Is this live?" She didn't flinch. We thought it was time everyone heard about it. The real story. I pulled back in my chair, blinking fast to keep my face still. I glanced around the room. Everyone was nodding, sipping wine, sharing side glances. They weren't watching me. They were watching a presentation. I wasn't the host. I was the content. It wasn't just the slideshow. It wasn't just the speech. It was the way no one said my name. Not once during that entire presentation did anyone say, "Beverly." They called me her, our daughter, the one who paints. But not me. I'd been here before. At school award ceremonies where my name was listed, but never read aloud. At church when they introduced other kids by name and me as Paiche's youngest. In college, when my mother told the pastor I was dabbling in art instead of saying I'd made the dean's list. There's a unique kind of invisibility that comes from being fully present and completely erased at the same time. And in that moment, it happened again. As the comments rolled in on the live stream, yes, there was a live chat, I caught one that made my stomach turn. "Didn't know she was working with Piche. He's always had that spark." Spark? He didn't know what brand of paint I used. He once called acrylics lazy watercolors. "I think it's time I leave," I said, my voice measured. My father, mid-sentence about expansion plans, didn't stop. My brother kept scrolling. Only my mother looked up. "You're not staying for the QA?" she asked. "What questions could there be?" I replied. "He's already told the story." I stood, adjusted my sweater, and walked slowly to the door. As my hand reached for the knob, I felt her grip wrap around my wrist. "Don't embarrass us now," she hissed under her breath. I turned, looked her straight in the eyes, and said clearly enough for the room to hear, "That would require you to feel shame." Her hand fell away. I didn't rush. I walked out like I had all the time in the world. Once outside, the air hit different. Cool, real, uncurated. In my car, I sat for a long time. My hands trembled. Not from fear, from recognition. I held the studio keychain in my palm, the small brass tag stamped with Sweet 19. My initials carved in the corner, BRP. Inside that studio were my brushes, my canvases, my vision. But somewhere inside that house, they were rewriting all of it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the thin mattress in my studio, staring at the half-painted ceiling, listening to the faint creaks of the building as it settled. My eyes traced the edges of where I'd planned to hang student artwork, hoping that order and ambition would override the chaos I felt inside. But it didn't. I was restless, wired, not from caffeine or excitement, but from the residue of being blindsided again by my own blood. It's a strange thing, realizing you're a guest in your own success, that the people who are supposed to lift you up quietly resent how far you've climbed. I wasn't exhausted from work. I was tired of walking a tightrope between being tolerated and being erased. And no matter how many times I tried to reframe it, that dinner had pulled the mask off. I climbed off the mattress and walked over to the drawer where I kept old journals. One was from high school, its cover frayed, corners curled like dried leaves. I opened it and flipped past the naive doodles of hearts and trees until I landed on a page that simply read, Chicago. Art. Future. Beneath it was a checklist. Scholarships to apply for. Supplies to buy. A life I'd mapped out on the pages of a spiral-bound dream. That dream hadn't disappeared. It had been dismantled piece by piece until I could no longer recognize it. When people erase you long enough, you start writing yourself in pencil, easily smudged, easily forgotten. I ran my finger down that list and remembered the one letter that never came. Back then, I'd applied to the Chicago College of Art and Design. I did it in secret, used the school's computer lab, had the acceptance letter mailed to the house because I didn't have a stable mailing address of my own. Every day after school, I rushed home to check the mailbox. Weeks passed. Nothing, not even a rejection. My mother told me not to get my hopes up. "Those kinds of places eat girls like you alive," she said one evening while slicing apples. Years later, while I was helping her clean out the hallway cabinet, digging through expired coupons and yellowing utility bills, I found it, a shredded envelope with my name on it, and the school's crest still visible in the upper corner. It was buried between a rolled-up phone book and a broken remote. My hands went numb. "Oh, that," my mother said, not even glancing up. "It looked like one of those fake mailers. You wouldn't have lasted in a city like that anyway." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and put the pieces back. That was the day I learned not all sabotage is loud. Some of it smiles at you while offering pie. I smiled back, even laughed. I kept organizing the drawer. But inside, something cracked. That was the day I realized my mother didn't just fear failure, she orchestrated mine. James came a year after that. He was kind. The kind of man who looked you in the eye when you talked and remembered the name of your cat. He loved asking questions about my art, what colors I liked, what pieces I hated, why I painted hands more than faces. He once told me, "You see people differently than most, like you're sketching their soul instead of their skin." I didn't fall quickly, but I fell. After 3 months of dating, he asked to meet my parents. I hesitated, told him they were complicated. He said, "That's okay, so am I." My mother invited him to dinner. She said she wanted to know who I was spending time with. The evening was polite. My father was mostly quiet. My brother didn't come. My mom did all the talking, asked James about his job, his family, his plan for the future. After dessert, she pulled me into the kitchen under the guise of packing leftovers. "You really think he's going to stick around?" she asked, barely whispering. "He doesn't know what he's signing up for." "He likes me," I said. "He respects what I do." She snorted. "He doesn't know how much you need us. Once he sees that, he'll walk. They all do." I didn't respond. 2 weeks later, James stopped calling. When I finally confronted him, he admitted she'd pulled him aside after dinner and said, "She needs to stay here. This family is all she has." I didn't chase him. I didn't yell or cry. I just let the relationship die. Quietly. Like the letter in the drawer. When someone tells you you're property, you stop believing you deserve freedom. The studio was still quiet, the kind of silence that buzzed in your ears. I sat at the desk in the corner and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I started writing, not a letter to my parents, but to myself. You didn't imagine it, it was real, and it wasn't your fault. I wrote that sentence 5 times, then underlined it. I pinned it on the wall, just below the quote I'd painted weeks ago. Built with bare hands, not borrowed names. For the first time, my name felt like it belonged there. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness, a narrator. And I was going to tell the story before they rewrote it again. I started a folder, scanned what I had of the lease, archived emails from my dad, took screenshots of the livestream comments. I began collecting evidence, not for revenge, but for truth. If trauma is inherited, then maybe healing can be too, but someone has to name it first. I stood and stretched, my legs stiff from sitting so long. As I turned toward the shelf to grab a new notebook, I noticed something tucked behind an old box labeled Winter Supplies. It was a plastic storage bin. I pulled it down, thinking it was full of extension cords or maybe leftover twine. But it was lighter than I expected. Inside, carefully wrapped in a manila envelope, was a letter. Chicago College of Art and Design. Untouched. Folded. Clean edges. There was a post-it on the outside, my mother's handwriting. "Don't show her." Underneath it was something else, a second signature, not mine. After finding that letter, whole, unshredded, untouched, I stood frozen for longer than I care to admit. My fingers trembled just holding it. The post-it in my mother's handwriting might as well have been a knife. "Don't show her." Not maybe later, not keep for when she's ready. Just a clear instruction, hide the truth. The next morning, I woke with a stiffness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I sat on the edge of the studio cot, staring at the letter now locked in a fireproof box. I didn't have the strength to confront them about it yet, not the way I needed to, but I knew something had to change. I opened my laptop and typed a short email to my parents. It was polite, firm, clear. I'd like to talk. Not about memories, not about family values. I want to talk about the lease, the studio, and the future. I'll bring a short presentation. I just want a real conversation. Hours later, my mother replied, Dinner, Thursday. Bring your slideshow. Slideshow. Like it was a school project. I spent the next day assembling a folder with charts, growth potential, community outreach, income projections. I printed photos of students in workshops, emails from clients asking about future classes. I even included a thank you card from a widow who said my class helped her hold a paintbrush instead of a wine glass. Maybe, I thought, if I spoke their language, structure, profit, statistics, they'd finally hear me. When I arrived Thursday evening, the house looked like a set. Dinner plates prepped, lighting just so, glasses sparkling. My mother wore a dress I hadn't seen since a wedding 5 years ago. My father grinned from the kitchen as if nothing had ever been wrong. Well, well, he said. The starving artist brings a slideshow. Is there catering too? I smiled, small, controlled. Inside, my stomach turned over. Dinner started with small talk, too polite, too rehearsed. I passed around my presentation folder like it was a tray of hors d'oeuvres. They flipped through it, nodded in silence, but I saw it, the smirk on my dad's face, the shared glance between him and my brother, and then the toast. My brother stood, raising his glass. To Bev, he began, proving you don't need a husband, kids, or a backup plan if you've got enough ego to carry you. The table burst into laughter. Except me, I didn't say a word. I didn't blink. My aunt leaned over and whispered, It's brave, you know, living like a spinster these days. My mother passed me a bowl of salad, murmuring, We still pray you'll settle down one day. Maybe after this phase settles. I folded my napkin slowly, staring at the candle between us. The flames flickered, casting warped shadows across her face. They said these things like compliments wrapped in thorns, I thought. It's how Southern women wound you without raising their voices. I memorized every word, every look, every chuckle. No one saw the fire building behind my silence. The next morning, I poured myself a black coffee and sat down to check emails. One subject line stood out. Feature live now. Arts in action. It was from a local journalist I'd spoken to about revitalizing Toledo's art scene. We'd met weeks ago in the studio. I'd walked her through my process, shared my mission, even cried a little when describing how the space had become a haven for people finding themselves again through color and canvas. I clicked the link and froze. The headline read, From Garage to Glory, a father's vision comes to life. My name appeared once. In the second paragraph, briefly, the rest was quotes from my father, describing his vision for community enrichment, his investment in his daughter's potential, his leadership in transforming the space. There were photos. Him standing next to half-finished walls, him holding a brush next to a smiling child, him alone, staring proudly at a freshly painted mural, one I'd designed, drawn, and completed with those same students. I scrolled. At the bottom was a direct quote. Her father, Paiche Onyemaechi, explained the vision behind the garage transformation. I closed the laptop, breathed, opened the email chain. I found it. His reply, BCC'd from my original conversation, sent from his work email. A full breakdown of our shared journey. He attached edited photos. He reworded my quotes, claimed authority over every inch of progress I'd made. He didn't just hijack my story, he rewrote the origin. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw things. I opened a new Word document. Title, Proof They'll Never Acknowledge Me. I pasted the full article, highlighted every false claim, noted every quote that had once been mine. Then, I printed it, slipped it into a red binder, filed it next to the scholarship letter. At the school that afternoon, I stopped by the staff lounge and placed the article on the table beside my colleague Sarah. She skimmed it. Her eyebrows drew together. I thought this was your project, she asked. It is, I said, pouring myself tea. But sometimes you have to let people lie long enough to hang themselves. She looked at me for a long moment. You always were too graceful. I smiled. Not anymore. That evening, I lit a few candles in the studio and tried to paint, but I kept staring at the phone. A quiet pulse of tension hummed in my ears. At 9:43 p.m., it buzzed. Voicemail. I waited 5 minutes before listening. It was my father. "I need access to the studio," he said, his voice brisk. "We're expanding operations. Told the press already. Just unlock the back room. I'll bring the contractor Monday." "No, please. No. Can we talk?" No acknowledgement of the article, just assumption, just command. I replayed the message twice, then once more. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. The voicemail echoed in my ears long after the message ended. "We're expanding operations. Told the press already." He didn't ask. He informed, just like that. My studio, my work, my name were pieces on a chessboard I wasn't even playing. I stayed up late, scribbling down everything I could remember about the lease, the dates, the clauses, the exact wording around co-ownership and usage. I knew what he was doing. I just didn't know how far he'd already gone. I arrived at the studio the next morning before sunrise. The neighborhood was still groggy, streetlights buzzing as if unsure if they should shut off yet. My key clicked into the lock, but before I could turn the knob, I heard voices inside. I pushed the door open. There was Frank, my brother, with a contractor I'd never seen before, measuring tape stretched across the back wall, clipboard in hand. "What the hell is this?" I asked. Frank barely turned around. "Dad said to start prepping the back. We've got a quote coming in today." "You're kidding." "Nope." He marked something on the drywall. "It's happening. Fast-tracked. Good for you, too. More exposure. More reach." I stepped forward. Did I approve this? No. Did I even know about it? Absolutely not. He turned, finally facing me, like I was interrupting his boardroom pitch. "You're part of the family, Bev. It's all the same pot. What's yours is ours. That's how Dad sees it." "I'm not a pot," I snapped. "I'm not your investment." He shrugged. "Maybe not, but your name is on it, so it's working for all of us now." I turned around and left, fast. Back to my apartment, where I opened my email and scanned through my landlord correspondence. And there it was. An update from the property manager. Subject line, lease co-signature updated. Per request from primary leaseholder Paiche Onyemaechi, we've added Frank Onyemaechi to the documentation as an acting party for expansion purposes. Acting party. I nearly threw my laptop across the room. They were staging a silent takeover. One favor, one signature clarification, one "we're just helping you grow" at a time. And I had walked right into it with open eyes and a tied tongue. Months before I'd painted the walls of that studio, before I'd even signed the lease, I'd scraped every corner of my life to fund it. Grants, late-night workshops, Saturday commissions for pet portraits I hated doing. I had painted every inch of that floor myself, often on hands and knees, hauled secondhand furniture from garage sales, filled out LLC documents in ink because the digital forms glitched and I couldn't afford another delay. And now, those same efforts were being used as bricks for someone else's name. I remembered that family barbecue last spring. My dad stood up, beer in one hand, pointing toward Frank. "This one right here, he's the future. Real grit, real numbers. He'll take the family name farther than I ever did." Everyone clapped. I'd been grilling veggies alone in the kitchen, overhearing every word. Back then, I thought it was just typical favoritism. Now I saw it for what it was, a campaign, a quiet, calculated repositioning. They weren't helping me build something. They were setting up to take it when I was done doing the hard work. I pulled out my phone and searched through the online incorporation records. Frank was listed as the CFO. The paperwork had been filed 3 weeks ago. Without me, without my signature, without my consent. I rushed to the studio lockbox. It was hidden behind old paint cans in the storage closet, wedged behind a metal bracket no one ever touched. The envelope was still there, torn open. The original lease agreement was missing. So was the copy of our co-ownership agreement. The only things left inside were a few business receipts and my initial studio sketches. I called my mother. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my tone calm, "do you know anything about the documents from my lockbox? Someone's taken them." There was a pause on the line, too short to be surprise, too long to be innocent. You probably left them lying around, Beverly. You've always been forgetful. No, I didn't. They were secured. In a locked box. She sighed. Well, if they're gone, maybe you shouldn't have left them somewhere so vulnerable. My jaw clenched. You were here last week. So was Frank. And your father. We were there to support you. If things got moved around, she trailed off. Did you take them? I asked flatly. Don't be dramatic, she said. If you're so smart, why didn't you make a copy? That sentence hit harder than any slap. I didn't hang up. I didn't yell. I just said, thanks, Mom, and ended the call. The fury didn't burn this time. It chilled. Solid. Calculated. That night, I took a long walk and ended up at the local legal aid clinic before it closed. I explained the situation to a young woman named Carla who wore tortoiseshell glasses and typed faster than most people breathe. She looked over my printouts, my scan files, the emails. You've got a case, she said. But the lease language is vague. If you want to take action, we need to get something formal in place now. I nodded. Can I draft a cease and desist? We can help you with that. Start there. Document everything else. I left the clinic with a folder and a resolve that didn't need adrenaline to exist. Back at the studio, I printed 2 copies. One I folded into my wallet. The other, I taped on the front door, center panel, eye level, in black, bold letters. Unauthorized use, entry, or modification of this space will result in legal action. The next morning, I arrived early. Frank was there again, on the phone, pointing at the ceiling like he was imagining chandeliers. I stood just inside the threshold. If you touch anything, I said, loud enough for the contractor to hear, it will be documented and reported. He scoffed. Are you serious? Dead serious, he laughed. What are you gonna do? Sue your own family? I tilted my head. No, I'm going to make sure no one believes you ever built any of this. For once, he had no comeback. He packed up quickly, muttering to the contractor to reschedule. I watched them leave, then locked the door. That night, my phone buzzed. It was a video message from an unknown number. I clicked play. The screen lit up with my father, standing in the middle of the studio. He was holding a sheet of paper in one hand, my contract, crumpled, and in the other, a hammer. I got there just after 7 a.m. earlier than usual. I hadn't slept much the night before. The video of my father holding the contract in one hand and a hammer in the other kept replaying in my mind like a scene from a bad courtroom drama. But this wasn't fiction. This was real, and it was unfolding right in front of me. When I rounded the corner to the studio, something felt wrong. Not off, not slightly different. Wrong, visibly, deliberately wrong. The lock had been changed. I stopped short and stared at the brushed steel padlock staring back at me, shiny, out of place, and definitive. Then I saw it. A laminated sign taped to the door. Closed for renovation. Property of Anya Maichi Holdings. My breath caught mid-chest. Property of what? My legs moved before my brain gave permission, fists pounding on the door with more panic than purpose. The thuds echoed too loudly, bouncing off the street like a warning bell. It opened after the 4th knock. My father stood there with a steaming mug of coffee in hand, the other resting casually on the frame, like he was greeting a neighbor, not his daughter locked out of her own work. You're early, he said. We weren't expecting you today. We? He stepped aside. Inside, boxes lined the floor, most of them mine, labeled in unfamiliar handwriting. My canvases leaned against the wall like unwanted decorations. Everything personal had been packed away, taped shut. What is this? I asked. Modernization, he said simply. You've had your turn. Now it's time to grow this space into what it's meant to be. Real business. Real numbers. I stepped forward, heart pounding. This was mine. You had potential, he said, sipping from his mug. But potential doesn't pay rent. Your little paint nights? They're cute. But this is expansion. I didn't even register the pain in my chest. It was the kind that comes when everything inside you collapses at once, not from a single blow, but from the slow compaction of truth. "What did you do with the contract?" I asked. His eyes danced. "I asked you a question," I repeated, more firmly now. He set the mug down on a shelf with exaggerated care, then reached into a folder on the table. He held up a wrinkled piece of paper. "My lease, or what used to be." "You mean this?" I stepped forward instinctively. "Careful," he said, tone mock-fatherly. "You want this back? Then earn it." He held it out. I reached, and that's when he tore it. One clean motion. No hesitation. The sound it made was too soft for what it did to me. Before I could speak, he lifted the heavy file box next to him and swung it. The edge caught me square across the nose. The crack echoed in my skull. Pain bloomed instantly, bright and disorienting. I stumbled backward, hands to my face, warmth spreading across my lips. Blood. Everywhere. I heard my own breathing, short and panicked, and the clatter of something hitting the floor. I don't remember if I screamed or just gasped, but I do remember the voice that came next. My mother's. "You brought this on yourself," she said from the doorway. "You act like you're better than everyone else." I turned toward her, eyes stinging, trying to focus through the blur. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, arms crossed, watching her husband bleed her daughter. That's when I knew. I wasn't their child anymore. I was their defiance, incarnate. I don't remember how I got to the car. I just know I was there. Legs folded into the driver's seat, hand clamped over my nose, phone in my lap. I dialed my mentor. No signal. I tried the hotspot. No connection. Confused, I reached for my laptop and opened my email. The screen took longer than usual to load. When it did, it greeted me with an empty inbox. Every folder, gone. I blinked, tried refreshing. Tried recovering. Nothing. I opened my backup Gmail. No forwarded messages, no notifications. I called Alex, a friend from my old tech gig. "Bev, it's early. Are you okay?" "My account," I said. "My main work email, it's gone. Wiped clean." There was a pause. I could hear keys tapping. "Looks like admin-level deletion from a linked device. You didn't grant access to anyone recently, did you?" My stomach dropped. "Last week. My mother. She borrowed my laptop for a recipe." "She wanted to check Pinterest," I whispered. Alex sighed. "Then you need to assume everything's been compromised." The blood from my nose had dried across my lips and cheek by now, stiff and itchy. But I didn't wipe it. I sat in that parking lot, stunned, the cold realization blooming deeper than any bruise. She hadn't just deleted my inbox, she deleted my livelihood, my clients, my grants, my outreach. She'd severed the lifeline I'd spent years building. And she did it with a smile and a cinnamon scone. I walked into urgent care alone, clutching a tissue that had long since given up the fight. The receptionist looked up and visibly flinched. "Do you need immediate care?" she asked, already rising from her chair. "I need someone to look at this," I said, motioning toward my nose. "And maybe help me stop it from happening again." The nurse was kind, gentle. They brought me back quickly, no waiting room formalities. One of the doctors recognized my name from a local feature. "You're the artist," she said. "The studio downtown?" I nodded. "Not anymore." She examined my face. "Was this a fall?" I hesitated. "No," I said. "My father hit me. My mother watched." There was no gasp, no look of disbelief, only a slow nod and the scribbling of a pen. "Thank you for telling us. We'll file a report. You're not alone in this." They offered pamphlets, resources, a number for legal aid. But what hit harder than the pain was the silence I had walked in with. I had made it normal. I had assumed it wouldn't be believed. And yet here, in this sterile room, no one questioned it. As the nurse wrapped a compress around my head, she handed me my phone. "You've got a voicemail," she said. "From your mother. Want me to play it?" I didn't answer right away, but I nodded. And as soon as her voice filled the room, I realized she wasn't calling to say sorry. The nurse pressed play before I had the strength to say no. My mother's voice spilled into the quiet exam room, controlled but sharp. You did this. You pushed him. You've ruined everything. Come home and apologize, or don't bother coming back. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I just sat there, tissue soaked with blood crumpled in my hand, and listened to the full 2-minute voicemail. She wasn't calling to check on me. She wasn't asking if I needed help. She was reclaiming a narrative, one where I was the problem, not the proof. I looked up at the nurse. "I'm not just here for stitches," I said. "I need a statement recorded. I'm filing a report." She nodded, her face still and professional, but there was something else behind her eyes. Recognition. "You're not the first daughter we've seen do this," she said, "but it still matters." An hour later, I stood at the police station, pen in hand. I walked them through everything: the lease, the hit, the erased emails. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I gave dates, times, names. I even remembered the smell in the studio when the box hit my face: coffee and drywall. When I reached the end, the officer slid the report toward me and handed me the pen. "For the record," he said, and for the first time, I used my name not to explain myself, but to protect myself. Beverly Rose Potts, signature clean, unflinching. Later that day, I got a call from one of my students. "Miss Potts?" she said, voice hesitant. "Why does the studio say it's under new management? There's a different name on the flyer. Anya Mayeki something." My stomach dropped. I hung up and drove there without grabbing my keys. When I arrived, the sign had changed. The mural I painted was covered by a new banner: Anya Mayeki Arts Creative Business Center. My name was gone. My colors erased. I tried the door. My key didn't work. A security guard stepped out from a side office. "Can I help you?" "I'm the founder of this space," I said, voice tightening. He tapped on his tablet. "According to records, the property has been transferred. Owner on file is Paiche Onyemaechi, and co-executive Frank Onyemaechi." He held up the screen. There it was, a PDF with my forged signature. I recognized it immediately. They had copied it from my old grant applications. Same angle, same pressure. I backed away, silent. My phone buzzed. An email from the property owner. "Just confirming the recent transition. We've updated all co-signers as per your father's request. You were CC'd, weren't you?" No, I wasn't. But they didn't need me to be. I hadn't just been replaced. I'd been erased. I parked 2 blocks away from the nearest Starbucks and sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the dashboard before I found the courage to text Professor Landon. She hadn't heard from me in 2 years, but she was the only person who knew what this studio meant to me before anyone else tried to claim it. "Beverly Potts here. I need help. Do you have time?" It didn't take long. Her response came within minutes. "Meet me tomorrow. Bring everything. This doesn't stop here." I pulled out a box from my trunk, the one I'd started filing after the article, after the dinner, after the scholarship letter. I labeled it in Sharpie. They thought I wouldn't fight. That night, I sat on the studio floor of my apartment, lights low, laptop open. I recorded myself. Not for posting, not yet. But I needed to speak, to see myself speaking. I looked straight into the camera. "They declared war," I said. "Fine. I'm not afraid of being the villain in their story anymore." My voice was low, calm, dangerous in a way I hadn't recognized before. And it felt good. The next afternoon, I walked downtown. There were flyers stapled to every light pole. My father and brother's faces, front and center. Celebrating Toledo's legacy in arts entrepreneurship. A stage was being set up in front of the community center. Cameras everywhere. I stood across the street in a gray hoodie, sunglasses pulled low, unseen. I watched them laugh on camera, my father giving interviews, Frank standing proudly by a large banner with the studio's new name. A reporter walked past me. "You're Beverly, right?" I pushed my glasses up. "Why?" "We're running a follow-up story next week. Your dad mentioned you were the inspiration behind it all. You okay being included?" I looked him straight in the eye. "That'll be a correction then, because this isn't the story anymore." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You will be. I said, and walked away. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Professor Landon. Bring a hard drive. The legal team wants full timeline documentation. We're filing for injunction tomorrow. I sat at my desk for a long time that night, not from fear, but from the weight of finally being seen. I arrived at the courthouse half an hour early, not because I was nervous, but because I needed to see the building empty, before it filled with people who didn't know me and others who did but chose to pretend they didn't. Toledo County Courthouse sat on a corner where the sidewalks always seemed cleaner than the rest of downtown. The building had the smell of polished pine and the sterile chill of bureaucracy. I stood for a moment before stepping inside, pressing my palms together to slow the thrum of my heartbeat. Justice, it seemed, had to be sterilized to be taken seriously. My mentor, Professor Landon, now acting as my legal advisor, was already waiting inside, a tidy folder marked "Evidence Time-Stamped" in her hands. She looked at me with a quiet nod, not a smile. That's how I knew she meant business. Across the aisle, my parents sat stone-faced, pretending not to see me. My father's legs were crossed casually, arms folded like he was waiting for a meeting that had nothing to do with him. My mother, in a beige suit that made her look more like a bystander than a conspirator, kept tapping her foot. Rhythmic, deliberate. I took my seat. This time, I didn't come to be heard. I came to be seen. The opening arguments began. My father's lawyer stood first. He painted the entire situation as a tragic misunderstanding among family. He used words like disappointment and miscommunication. He called my actions uncharacteristic and said I had been confused by influence from third parties. I kept my face still because I knew what was coming, and they didn't. The opposing attorney wheeled out a flat-screen TV. I'd like to introduce visual documentation from security footage dated 3 weeks prior, she said. The judge nodded. The lights dimmed slightly, and there it was, grainy but clear footage from my studio's internal camera. First, my father stepping into frame, picking up the lease agreement from my desk, then ripping it in half. Next, him grabbing the edge of a heavy box, swinging it in my direction, the impact not seen, but the aftermath unmistakable. Me falling, clutching my face. Then, my mother entering the frame, not to intervene, not to check on me, but to laugh. The sound didn't play. It didn't need to. The courtroom was silent, except for the rhythmic tapping of the judge's pen against her mug. Click, click, click. I didn't watch the screen. I watched their faces. My father blinked once, then turned pale. My mother clenched her jaw and folded her arms tighter, the foot tapping now still. The truth wasn't loud. It was pixelated, time-stamped, undeniable. The lawyer switched slides. Next came the medical report, a printout of my injury, scans, diagnosis, nasal fracture, minor concussion, bruising, then the log. An access attempt 2 days later from a device registered under my mother's name, request submitted, withdraw incident report, family dispute, no further concern. The clinic had denied it. I remembered that moment now, with painful clarity, her borrowing my laptop to look up a banana bread recipe. I had walked into the kitchen to find her typing. She minimized the window too fast. I had chalked it up to something stupid. Pinterest, maybe. But now I knew. She didn't just stand by while he hit me. She tried to erase the blood I left behind. The judge looked down at me. "Ms. Potts," she said, voice even. "Do you intend to pursue criminal charges?" I inhaled slowly. My eyes didn't leave my parents. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "For the record, I am not theirs to control anymore." The hearing concluded faster than I expected. The judge signed a temporary injunction on the spot. All activity at the studio was to cease. Locks changed, assets frozen. My name, my business, was protected until full proceedings could begin. I stepped outside into a sea of microphones and cameras, but I didn't stop. "Beverly, are you okay? Was the footage real? Do you have a statement?" I didn't look at any of them. I kept walking, until one reporter asked, "Do you have anything to say to your family?" I turned. I'm not here to be famous, I said. I'm here to be free. Professor Landon stepped in, hand light on my shoulder. That was just phase 1, she whispered. The full trial's coming. We kept walking. I held the injunction in my hand, fingers curled around the edges. For the first time in months, my name, was printed on something official. Not as a footnote, not as a shared title, as the rightful owner. The paper wasn't heavy, but it carried more weight than everything they'd tried to steal. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, feet crossed, tea cooling in my hands. A text came through. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. Hope you enjoyed the show. Next time, bring popcorn. I stared at it. No emojis, no threats, just smug confidence. I didn't reply, but I opened a new folder on my computer, labeled it Phase 2, Public Record. I started saving screenshots, and I had a feeling I'd need more than just popcorn. The subject line read, "For what it's worth." I stared at it, lips pressed tight, fingers motionless on the trackpad. It was an email from my mother. No context, no lead-up, just that single phrase staring back at me like a dare. I clicked. Inside, just one sentence. I hope you're happy. You brought this on us. And attached beneath it, a photo. Me, sitting in the clinic, tissue pressed to my face, blood staining my shirt, eyes hollow from more than just pain. That night, when I could barely speak, when my face was still numb and my ribs ached from crying. Somehow, someone had taken a picture. And now here it was, sent back to me like a receipt. Beneath the image, another line. Maybe now you'll stop acting like you're better than us. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I printed it. I walked over to the red binder where I'd kept court documents, audio transcripts, printouts of emails, screenshots of forged signatures. I slid the photo in behind the last page and wrote across the top in black ink. Evidence, family legacy. Her version of love came with receipts and shame. And now, I had both. A week later, my Aunt Janice invited me to a baby shower for my cousin Marlene. A part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, tired of being seen as the one who can't let things go, forced me to say yes. I wore something simple, understated. I arrived late on purpose and sat near the back, close to the garden where the party had spilled over with folding chairs and lemonade. I stayed quiet. People smiled politely, made small talk about weather and local politics. Not a single person mentioned the hearing, the footage, the injunction. But they knew. Halfway through the party, while kids ran around screaming and the adults gossiped near the buffet, I felt a small tug on my sleeve. It was Caleb, my 9-year-old nephew. He looked up at me, cheeks flushed from sun and excitement. "Aunt Bev?" he asked. I smiled, gently. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" "Yeah," he said, then hesitated. "Is it true you called the police on Grandpa because of money?" My heart skipped. "Who told you that?" I asked softly. He shrugged. "Grandma said you got confused, and now everyone's mad. But my mom said you were brave. I think you are." He ran off before I could say anything. Left me sitting there, the air suddenly thick around me. It wasn't the lie that hurt. It was that they were already teaching the next generation the wrong story. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. My mother was standing at the sink, rinsing out glasses, her movements calculated. She didn't look up when I walked in. "You sent that photo on purpose," I said quietly. Still no glance. Just a long pause. "You embarrassed us," she replied. "Actions have consequences." I stepped closer. "So does silence." She turned then, finally, wiping her hands on a towel. I was trying to preserve peace. "Keep the family from falling apart." "There's no peace in pretending," I said. "You've rewritten the truth so many times, even children don't know what's real anymore." "You've always made things bigger than they needed to be," she said, voice sharp now. "You stir up trouble and then act like you're the victim when people push back." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "This is the court order," I said, placing it on the counter. "The judge's signature, the injunction. You're not invited into my failure anymore, and you're definitely not part of my success." The room grew silent. Even Janice stopped stirring the soup. I turned and walked out the front door. I didn't cry in the car, because I didn't owe them that. Back in the studio, I sat down and looked at the corkboard where I'd pinned up old photos, letters, court notices. There in the center, I pinned 2 new additions: the email from my mother and a photo of myself at age 7, painting in the backyard, covered in color, smiling like no one had told me yet that dreams had expiration dates. One day, when they tell my story, I want the truth to hang beside the lies. That night, I got an email from my lawyer. The court had accepted all my submitted evidence. The testimony timeline had gone viral on a legal advocacy forum. Thousands of shares, dozens of messages from other women saying they felt seen, heard, believed. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't yelling into a void. Later, a podcast reached out. They wanted an interview. No filters, no family, just my voice, my version. I said yes, not because I needed validation, but because I deserved to speak. The next morning, I walked to the mailbox and found a letter addressed to me. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. I held it between my fingers, weighing its presence, heavy in a way paper shouldn't be. I stood by the trash can, envelope unopened, fingers twitching. And then I stopped, because something in the weight made me hesitate, not out of hope, but out of curiosity. I stared at the letter for a long time. My fingers traced the envelope's edge like it held the last breath of a chapter I never wanted to reopen. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, thick, sharp loops like he was always trying to sign with authority rather than care. I didn't open it, not out of fear, out of refusal. I slid it into a sealed folder labeled unfinished. That's what it was to me now. Not closure, not apology, just one more attempt to stake a claim on a story I was finally writing myself. Instead of reading it, I opened the voice memo app on my phone and hit record. "My name is Beverly Rose Potts," I said. "And this is the last time I'll speak their names without power behind mine. Closure isn't a favor they give you. It's a choice I've made." I stopped the recording, saved it under a new folder titled Proof of Survival. I packed my things slowly for the hearing. No drama, no panic. I wore a navy dress with sleeves to the wrist. Tied my hair back in a knot, the kind of look you wear when you know you won't need to raise your voice to be heard, because this time, the facts would do the talking. I left the envelope untouched on my desk. It would stay that way. The courtroom looked smaller the second time. Familiar. Predictable. My father's lawyer, dressed in dark gray with a tie too tight around his neck, stood up and started again. "Your Honor, my client believes this has spiraled far beyond what any family dispute should, and while he accepts some responsibility for miscommunication, we would like to clarify." Professor Landon rose. Didn't wait. "May I submit the compiled record?" she said. She placed a bound presentation on the table with practiced ease. On the cover, Beverly Potts v. Pecha Onya Mechi. 50 slides. Slide 1. A timeline of physical and psychological abuse. Dated. Backed by emails and eyewitness statements. Slide 12. Financial documents proving redirection of studio funds into accounts under my brother's name. Slide 26. Screenshots of my erased inbox, logins from my mother's device. Slide 34. Court-submitted photos of my injuries, marked, cataloged. Slide 50. Studio ownership filings from the county recorder's office, initialed by me, then overwritten days later with forged e-signatures. The judge looked up, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Onyemayeki's counsel," she said, calm and sharp. "You may want to revise your interpretation of family support." My father shifted. His lawyer sat down. No rebuttal, no further defense. The judge didn't slam a gavel. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply said, "All studio property, assets, and digital intellectual rights shall be immediately reinstated to Miss Beverly Potts. Defendant is fined for breach of contract, falsification of legal documents, and subject to a public retraction." I didn't smile. I didn't even breathe. I just picked up a pen and wrote 4 words on the corner of my file. We didn't shout. We proved. The courthouse steps felt too wide and too public. Reporters waited at the base, cameras ready. I stood behind Professor Landon and her legal assistant until someone asked, "Miss Potts, do you have anything to say?" I stepped forward just a bit, enough to speak, not enough to give them the image they wanted. "This wasn't about revenge," I said. "It was about truth." Flashbulbs, nods, someone said powerful. I didn't linger. I moved on. The courthouse parking lot was quiet by comparison. 2 of my former students stood near my car, holding a small sign that read, "We're proud of you, Miss P." I hugged them both. Their arms didn't hurt to be in. My phone buzzed again. A message from the scholarship foundation I'd applied to long ago, one I thought had vanished with the emails. "We'd like to sponsor your next community arts initiative. Let us know how we can help." I saved the message, flagged it for follow-up, breathed in. No parades, no balloons, just peace. And that was enough. Back at the studio, I changed the locks. The locksmith didn't ask questions. I didn't offer any. Once the new key was in place, I walked inside with the signed court order and placed it behind glass on the wall. Right next to the mural, right under the quote I painted months ago, "Built with bare hands, not borrowed names." Then I rehung a photo. Me, age 7, barefoot in the backyard, paint on my arms, a smile across my face like the world hadn't yet decided I needed to be small. Beneath it, I pinned a printout of the apology email from my mother, the one with the photo of my bloodied face, the one she thought would shame me. I labeled the collage, erased, then remembered. Later that evening, I sat at my desk with a fresh stack of paper and drafted a new grant proposal. Title: Art After Erasure. Mission: teach workshops to women silenced by family, history, or both. When I finished, I started scrubbing my brushes, the ones still caked in old, dried paint from the days before I stopped having time to create. Some stains take longer to lift, but that doesn't mean the canvas is ruined. The past doesn't vanish when you paint over it, but it does quiet, and that's enough. As I was locking up for the night, my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. A message from a verified account, a national platform, one that showcased survivor stories. They wanted to feature mine. They weren't asking to edit or reinterpret it. They were asking if I would tell it, in my words, no filter, no rewrite, no father's voice over mine. I stood still for a long time, and I didn't feel small. I felt ready. The letter sat on my desk for 4 days before I touched it. It didn't move, didn't whisper anything dramatic in the dark, didn't scream to be opened, but its presence was loud. My father's handwriting on the front, sharp, all caps, just like him, demanded attention. I wasn't ready to give it. That morning, I brewed a cup of coffee and stared at it again. Same spot, same light filtering through the studio windows. The steam from my mug curled over the paper, as if daring it to dissolve. It didn't. I finally opened it. Inside was one sentence. No greeting, no sign-off. "You may have won the battle, but you'll die alone," and broke. I exhaled slowly, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. It wasn't a letter. It was a curse. One final grasp for authority, dressed in bitterness and fear. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't shred it immediately either. I walked outside to the side of the studio where I'd installed a small fire-safe bowl last winter. For emergencies, turns out this qualified. I dropped the letter in, watched it curl, blacken, vanish. The ashes drifted upward like the smoke from every bridge I'd refused to burn. Once cooled, I scraped the remains into an envelope, labeled it with a black pen. Irrelevant. Then I whispered, just for myself, "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to carry dead things forward." I spent the next few days cleaning, not just the physical mess, but the weight I didn't realize I'd stored on every shelf. Old receipts, paintings I made just to impress them, studio brochures with their last names printed in fine text. Gone, some canvases I donated to a local youth shelter. Others I painted over, not out of anger, but release. A clean slate doesn't erase history. It just means you get to choose what happens next. In one storage box, I found my first business plan from 5 years ago. I read it aloud, laughing at how small I'd aimed. My biggest goal had been to break even, not to heal, not to teach, just to survive without leaning on them. That version of me had no idea what was coming, but she was brave in her own way. I folded the plan, slipped it into a folder labeled Foundations, and put it away. That evening, while clearing voicemail notifications, I saw one from Frank. I didn't listen. I hit delete. Forgiveness doesn't require reunion. Sometimes, silence is the best closure. I opened a new document on my laptop, drafted a fresh vision board for the next 5 years. No numbers, no justifications, just words. Freedom, color, truth. On Thursday afternoon, a woman knocked on the studio door holding her daughter's hand. She looked nervous, almost embarrassed. "Are you Beverly?" she asked. "I am." "My daughter, Kaylin, she's 16. She wants to learn to paint. She heard about your classes from the center. Do you still do beginner lessons?" I looked at Kaylin. She had shy eyes but confident posture, a notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. "Yes," I said, "I do." We set up a twice-weekly after-school group, just 4 girls at first. Small, focused, joyful. A few weeks in, Kaylin painted a self-portrait. When I walked by, I saw she had drawn herself not as she looked, but how she wanted to be. Chin raised, posture proud, colors bold. She looked at me and said, "I didn't know I could make myself look proud." My heart clenched. They said I'd end up alone, I thought later. But there's more family in one honest moment with a stranger than years of shared DNA. The local community center director stopped by the next day. "We're organizing a public mural downtown. We'd love for you to curate it, full commission." I accepted. On the way home, I looked up at the sky. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt open. That weekend, I sat cross-legged on the studio floor with my laptop balanced on my knees. The essay had been inside me for years. Now it had shape. Title: Inheritance Isn't Always Material. I wrote about bloodlines and borrowed names, about the weight of expectations that break bones instead of lifting spirits, about learning that sometimes freedom looks like walking away, not with anger, but with the audacity to choose peace. I sent it to the podcast host who had once offered to feature me. They replied the next morning. "Published, minimal edits. It's perfect." The post went semi-viral, shared in women's rights forums, trauma healing circles, artists groups. Each comment felt like a knot loosening in my chest. The studio shifted after that. People came not just for art, but for restoration. It stopped being a place I built just to prove something. It became a sanctuary, even for me. One night, after the girls had left and the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I lit a candle and began sketching again. The first time in weeks where the pencil moved without hesitation. "This piece?" I whispered aloud. "I earned it." The studio hummed around me, quiet, present, mine. At dawn, as I opened the mailbox, a new envelope caught my eye. No return address, different handwriting, but familiar, my mother's. I held it for a long time at the studio door. I didn't open it. I flipped it over. Blank. That told me everything I needed to know. The wall was more than a timeline. It was a declaration. Each document framed in black wood, each photo clipped beneath headlines that once tried to spin the truth. It started with the eviction notice they posted without warning, next to a copy of the police report, then the medical record that had survived my mother's attempt to erase it. At the center, a copy of the court ruling, ownership reinstated. Beverly Rose Potts. A group of college students stood in front of it, silent. They were visiting as part of a mentorship series I hosted now. Young women mostly, some wide-eyed, some already hardened by the reality of having to prove themselves over and over again. One of them turned to me and asked, "This actually happened?" I looked at her, not with bitterness, but with certainty. "It always does," I said. "We just don't always get to finish the story." Later, when they were gone and the space had quieted again, I stood in the middle of the studio and looked at the newest section we'd just added, the archive of almost erased women. It featured anonymous testimonials from those who had written in, other daughters, partners, creators, all recounting how their voices were rewritten or muted to protect someone else's image. The exhibit wasn't about my family anymore. This was my legacy, and it had nothing to do with blood. The email came late that evening, just as I was locking up. The sender's name struck me, a known arts philanthropist I had only read about in passing. Subject line, "Your story matters." They had seen the podcast, read the essay, and now they were offering to fund a national program under my name, a support initiative for women navigating creative careers without family backing. It took me a few hours to respond, not because I doubted them, because this time I was going to negotiate on my own terms. We set a video call for Friday. When they appeared on screen, I expected formality, suits, the usual tight smiles of people who were already calculating where their logo would go. But instead, the woman on the call said simply, "We don't want to own your story. We want to amplify it." I blinked, and for the first time in a long time, I felt disarmed by sincerity. I asked hard questions. We reviewed terms. I made it clear, no co-signers, no silent stakeholders, no creative oversight beyond my own. When we signed, I used my full name, Beverly Rose Potts. Later, I printed the new contract and framed it next to the shredded one from my father, the one he'd torn before hitting me with a box. The glass frame pressed them both flat, side by side. Proof that I had rewritten what they tried to write for me. A week later, I drove back to the house I grew up in. Not to reconcile, not to reopen wounds, but to end the loop. No one was home. The porch looked smaller. The grass hadn't been mowed in weeks. I walked up the familiar steps, envelope in hand. Inside, it was a letter I had written the night before. Just one sentence. "This isn't hate. It's distance. You had your story. I'm writing mine now." I slid it under the front door. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't linger. As I turned to walk down the driveway, my eyes drifted toward the garage. It had been converted into a storage unit years ago, the windows fogged and cracked. Through the dusty pane, I saw it, my old art desk, still there, covered in papers, maybe trash, unused. I didn't take it back. I left it, because I no longer needed to retrieve anything from that place. They made me fight to have a voice, but now, I didn't need their silence to validate it. The Chicago skyline came into view as the cab turned the final block. The Art Equity Summit was already in session when I arrived. I could hear applause from inside the auditorium as I was escorted to the backstage area. I was the closing keynote. When they introduced me, the room hushed. I stepped up to the podium in a navy blazer and jeans, my new uniform for truth-telling. I looked out into the crowd, then at the large projection screen behind me. It displayed a single quote, one I'd said in the podcast but had no idea would go viral. "The blood they tried to bury became my ink." And for once, I didn't feel the need to explain it. I spoke about ownership, about creative survival, about how erasure doesn't always come with a raised voice. Sometimes it arrives in soft smiles and phrases like, "We only want what's best for you." I ended by saying, "This legacy wasn't passed to me, I built it, brick by brushstroke." The room rose in a standing ovation, but I didn't bow. I just smiled. Quietly. Finally. That night, back in my studio, I painted again. Not for press. Not for proof. Just because I wanted to. On the far wall, a new mural took shape. A woman walking forward with scissors in one hand and roots in the other. Her face was undefined. Her steps were strong, the kind of image I would have needed at 16. As I stepped back to assess the lines, my phone buzzed. A new message. "The Smithsonian would like to feature your exhibit as part of a national tour. Interested?" I didn't answer right away. I stepped back, looked at the wall, and smiled. Finally, it looked finished.